What happens when the greatest danger to your life doesn't come from the outside world, but from the faces you trust the most? When the people closest to you try to take everything you have, your past, your peace, your identity, what do you do? Do you become the victim they expect, or the player who finally learns how to win their game? My name is Julia Moretti. I am 70 years old, and for the vast majority of my existence, I had been convinced that life had gifted me with only small, manageable happinesses. A house that possessed the comforting, earthy scent of old, well-loved wood. A rambling, untamed garden where the flora seemed to grow exactly as they pleased, ignoring all formal rules of horticulture. And, most importantly, the placid, predictable rhythm of a life lived by someone who had learned the subtle art of appreciating every mundane, quiet detail. I had no children of my own, but the notion of family was an expansive, fiercely held concept in my world. It centered on two pillars: my sister, Juliet, and my nephew, Lorenzo. Juliet, with her sharply defined opinions and an unwavering sense of what was right, had always been the anchoring presence in my life, a sturdy counterweight to my gentler nature. She was a woman of routine, too, but hers was a routine of meticulous control, unlike my relaxed drift. She was always present, a quiet force of gravity, a steady hand, and then there was Lorenzo. Lorenzo, my sister's son, had always possessed that magnetic, bright energy, a kind of inherent lightness that seemed to dissolve all gravity, making the serious things of the world appear fleeting and irrelevant. He was laughter incarnate, a constant, cheerful hum in the background of my years. My days were meticulously curated around these small joys. I'd wake with the first hint of morning light, the pre-dawn hush broken only by the chirping of early birds, and head straight to the veranda. My ritual began with watering the flowers, a meditative process where the cool, dew-kissed petals felt like velvet against my fingers. This was followed by my strong black coffee, always taken on that same worn wooden veranda, listening to the wind, my oldest companion, whispering secrets through the gnarled branches of the old oak trees that framed my property. Sometimes the tranquility would be punctuated by a call from Juliet, her voice crisp and clear even through the static of the phone line, offering some piece of family news, usually concerning a relative's engagement or a distant cousin's latest endeavor. Lorenzo's appearances were less scheduled, more like a sudden, welcome burst of sunshine. He would arrive, his smile wide and genuine, radiating the conviction that nothing in this world could ever be too serious, too demanding. He brought the outside world in. News snippets, loud, easy laughs, and colorful, often exaggerated stories of the neighborhood. During those visits, watching him move with such effortless joy, I often found myself indulging in the comforting fantasy that he, my vibrant nephew, would forever remain that constant, familiar, cheerful presence, effortlessly crossing the bridge of years alongside me. Juliet, in her characteristic way, loved to engage in light, almost teasing critiques, which she always framed as constructive advice. Her targets were usually my slightly wild garden, far too messy, Julia, one can barely tell the petunias from the weeds, or the gently haphazard arrangement of my antique-filled house. I would simply smile, a silent, knowing resistance, and listen, while Lorenzo would stand beside her, sometimes laughing with her in a shared moment, a bond that felt like an ancient inside joke, to which I still lacked the full context. These were our mornings and afternoons, saturated with the robust scent of coffee, punctuated by soft, knowing laughter, and underscored by the secure, almost heavy feeling that everything was precisely where it was supposed to be, fixed in its perfect, golden place. There was a deep, almost tangible peace woven into this comfortable routine. I felt utterly protected by the sheer predictability of my daily life, wrapped in the warm, familiar blanket of relatives I had known and implicitly trusted for the whole of my existence. Every visit, every shared silence, every small familiar gesture felt intrinsically right. There were no dark premonitions, no lingering doubts, and certainly no pressing fears to disturb the surface. Only the profound, comforting familiarity of someone who has lived long enough to truly grasp and appreciate the fleeting nature of each moment, even while knowing with a detached clarity that time stops its relentless march for absolutely no one. I could spend hours on end, simply sitting in the overgrown garden, watching the slow, deliberate tilt of the sun as it began its descent over the horizon, illuminating the flowers in a wash of gold and lavender, listening to the wind's soft, continuous murmur through the dense foliage. It was in these simple, timeless moments that I felt life in its purest, most essential form, utterly simple, profoundly calm, and overflowing with small, beautiful certainties. I truly believed I needed nothing more. And then, one seemingly ordinary Tuesday, the very routine I had imagined to be eternal began its gradual, almost imperceptible shift. It started like a shadow lengthening unnoticed, a change too subtle for my conscious mind to immediately register. I didn't know then that this day, the day Lorenzo effortlessly lifted a heavy terracotta pot and Juliet gave me detailed, almost clinical instructions on planting the new geraniums, would mark the quiet, unassuming beginning of something that would utterly rearrange the landscape of my entire life. All I did in that moment was smile, content in the perfect, fragile simplicity of the world immediately surrounding me. The following morning, a task long deferred finally presented itself: organizing the attic. For years, I had merely pushed dusty cardboard boxes from one corner to the next, a perennial chore of procrastination. It was time, I decided with a sudden, firm resolution, to confront the accumulated history all at once. I ascended the narrow, creaking stairs, a small, worn wooden ladder clutched in my hand, and began to open the sealed, dust-covered boxes, expecting nothing more than moth-eaten linens and forgotten Christmas decorations. Amidst the brittle, yellowed papers, faded photographs, and the almost forgotten detritus of my childhood, I found treasures I hadn't realized I'd lost. A diary written at the anxious, hopeful age of 16, stacks of letters from long estranged friends, tiny, seemingly insignificant objects, a smooth stone, a broken pocket watch,
that carried the profound, silent weight of powerful memories.
During this methodical excavation, I unearthed a box containing travel albums I had compiled with Adam. The photographs were a sudden, sharp jolt, a complex blend of aching nostalgia and quiet, profound joy. I revisited breathtaking landscapes we had explored, the sheer, unadulterated happiness reflected in our shared smiles, and felt a rush of silent gratitude for every single shared experience. Lorenzo soon arrived to offer his assistance, and later Juliet appeared, bearing a tray with steaming tea and my favorite shortbread cookies. We settled together on the dusty floor, the three of us, laughing over half-forgotten anecdotes and sharing the rich, complex tapestry of the past. Later, while attempting to move a particularly heavy, unmarked box, my fingers brushed against a thick, aged envelope. It was addressed to me, sealed, and carried Adam's distinctive, slightly rushed handwriting. I opened it with a tender caution, finding not just a heartfelt, hastily written note, but a pair of ornate, unused tickets to an exclusive art exhibition, one we had discussed attending but never managed to visit. I carefully tucked the contents away, feeling his presence again, but this time in a manner that wasn't painful or heavy, but strangely comforting, like a warm hand on my shoulder. The attic, which only hours earlier had seemed a mere repository of forgotten objects, transformed itself into an unexpected, secret refuge. As I finally descended the creaking stairs for lunch, I found myself thinking that the day, which had begun as an unwelcome, tedious chore, had somehow morphed into a small, unexpected adventure. And without consciously realizing it, I felt a deep, profound sense of being more alive than I had in the long, silent months since Adam's death. The current of my life, once stagnant, had begun, ever so gently, to flow again. In the subsequent days, the rhythm of my life maintained a comfortable, almost mesmerizing cadence. Yet it was distinctly altered by the attic's revelations. I continued my explorations, spending hours sifting through boxes, photographs, and the accumulating fragments of Adam's life. Lorenzo, true to his word and his nature, visited frequently. His help was invaluable. He organized the chaotic piles of papers and documents with an almost surgical precision that I lacked. Juliet, ever the dutiful sister, appeared with reliable frequency, bringing thermoses of strong coffee and her meticulously prepared, comforting home-cooked lunches. The house, which had settled into a kind of hollow, echoing silence in the wake of Adam's absence, was now being filled with the sounds of small everyday joys, the rustle of paper, the low murmur of conversation, the clatter of a fork on a plate. I felt, with a quiet certainty, that I was finally beginning the slow, arduous process of adapting to life without my husband. One quiet, sun-drenched morning, as I sat observing the gentle movements of the foliage while sipping my customary tea on the veranda, the mail arrived. The postman delivered a single, thick, official-looking letter bearing a stark government seal I did not recognize. Such formal correspondence was a rarity in my life, and an acute, immediate curiosity seized me. Lorenzo drifted into the kitchen, still dressed in his sleepwear, his movements slow but graceful, and noticed the envelope lying on the counter. "That looks important, Aunt Julia," he remarked, his voice a low morning rumble. He instinctively reached for the envelope before I could, his eyes scanning the formal text on the front. I let him pick it up, sensing a strange formality to the moment, a gravity I hadn't yet named. He smiled, that effortless, disarming smile of his, and gently placed the letter back on the counter, stepping away as if to grant me the solemn privacy of the moment. I picked up the heavy envelope, my fingers brushing the crisp paper, and with a mounting sense of anticipation, I broke the seal. Inside, I found news that was entirely unexpected, almost unbelievable. Adam had established an additional, significant legacy in an obscure private account, an ancient, highly complex investment he had orchestrated entirely in secret. The accompanying documents confirmed a sum that was not only considerable, but truly staggering, an amount I had never even dreamed of possessing. The sheer scale of the money made my hands clammy. I realized then that my Adam, the quiet man who loved reading and routine, had a hidden life, one that involved high-stakes financial maneuvers I could not begin to comprehend. I remained motionless, the paper trembling slightly in my hand, experiencing a dizzying blend of shock, an almost irrational gratitude, and a profound bewilderment. Lorenzo, instantly sensing the gravity of my reaction, moved to my side, his expression shifting from curiosity to gentle concern. He spoke softly, his words a simple, warm anchor. "Adam always wanted the best for you, Aunt Julia. He was a meticulous man, full of surprises." That understated, simple affirmation was incredibly comforting, reminding me of Adam's boundless capacity for silent devotion. But it also instantaneously delivered a crushing weight of responsibility. I knew with a sudden clear urgency that this was not a simple gift to be enjoyed. It was a complex situation that required practical, measured, and above all, careful handling. Later that same day, Juliet arrived, her usual whirlwind of activity contained within the purpose of bringing several of my grandmother's old, handwritten recipes she wanted me to try. We settled in the sunlit kitchen, and as she began the methodical, satisfying task of chopping vegetables for a traditional stew, she commented, her voice casual, yet carrying an underlying, almost philosophical resonance. "You know, Julia, sometimes we are truly astonished by what people leave behind. We think we know everything, but sometimes we don't even realize what is waiting for us silently right around the corner." She flashed a quick, almost enigmatic smile, but I dismissed the comment as her usual brand of philosophical meandering, more interested in the precise technique of slicing the root vegetables she was demonstrating. The rest of the afternoon was consumed by a frenzy of administrative tasks, sorting through paperwork, reorganizing Adam's old files, and making a series of tentative, complex phone calls to the banks and financial institutions to try and gain a clear understanding of this unexpected legacy. Lorenzo was a constant, invaluable presence nearby, effortlessly retrieving old financial statements and helping me cart small, heavy boxes of documents. Juliet, too, remained engaged, her interactions always carrying that gentle, solicitous tone, offering suggestions for small cosmetic improvements to the house, or providing thoughtful, almost clinical advice on how to correctly organize and handle the mountain of ancient paperwork. It was only as dusk began to settle, after the last document had been filed and the initial calls made, that I realized how utterly consumed the day had been by unexpected, escalating events. An official letter, a massive financial discovery about Adam's hidden life, shared family recipes, and the sudden pressing need to master complex finance. None of it seemed extraordinary in isolation, but taken together, they coalesced into a day that felt momentous, a definite turning point. As I prepared for sleep,
I reflected on the strange, new contours of my life. Despite the persistent, dull ache of missing Adam, I felt a new, unfamiliar resilience surging through me. The world surrounding me suddenly seemed more vibrant, more unpredictable than it had in months, and I could feel, with a serene and quiet clarity, the definite, undeniable premonition that new, perhaps even perilous things were now heading my way. The peaceful stagnation was over. Adam's secret gift felt less like a comfort and more like a mysterious, ticking package, forcing me to confront an unknown facet of my own destiny. The days that followed the initial discovery of Adam's secret wealth were characterized by a confusing, dizzying intensity. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a consuming anxiety fueled by the labyrinthine complexity of the inherited investment. It wasn't a simple savings account. It was tied to an arcane offshore holding company with a name that sounded like something out of a spy novel, Ethereum Global Trust. The documents were dense, filled with jargon about international tax law, non-disclosure agreements, and complex asset liquidation protocols. The very paper felt slick with illegality, or at least something bordering on the illicit. My calls to the bank were rarely fruitful. A rotation of stiff, unhelpful voices would explain that only the authorized executor of the Ethereum portfolio could initiate the transfer. And who was that executor? Adam, of course. His death had thrown the entire structure into a legal limbo, leaving the massive sum suspended, tantalizingly close, but utterly unreachable without the correct meticulous legal maneuvering. The entire process felt deliberately opaque, designed to frustrate and confuse me into giving up. I began to feel a deep, throbbing headache, a physical manifestation of the sheer complexity of the task ahead. It was during one particularly frustrating late-night session, poring over micro-printed legal terms, that I stumbled upon a small, unsettling clue. Buried within an old, encrypted email Adam had saved, a message I had only managed to access thanks to Lorenzo's patient, meticulous technical prowess, was a brief, cryptic correspondence. It wasn't about money. It was a vague exchange with an address I didn't recognize. Veridian.operations@secmeal.com. The content was chillingly simple. The agreed structure is active. Do not deviate from the protocol. They will be watching for the transfer. They. The plural pronoun chilled me to the bone. It immediately recast the inheritance from a benevolent gift to a potential trap. This wasn't just about money. It was about a conflict Adam was hiding. "Who are they, Lorenzo?" I whispered one evening, showing him the printout. I was careful to keep my voice low, as if the walls themselves had ears. Lorenzo, perched expertly on the edge of the ottoman, his brow furrowed in a mask of intense, protective concentration, tapped the text with a long, slender finger. It could be business partners, Aunt Julia, people who don't want the Ethereum money to move. Adam was a brilliant man, but perhaps not entirely transparent about all his dealings. He paused, looking genuinely concerned, his eyes reflecting a deep, serious worry. "This looks like a very high-stakes game, Aunt Julia, and you are holding the final, winning card, the one they are desperate to take from your hand."
Juliet, who was knitting by the fire, the clicking of her needles suddenly sounding loud and aggressive in the tense silence, sighed dramatically. Honestly, Julia, your late husband was always a theatrical mess. Can't he just leave a simple will like a normal person? Now we have to deal with phantom enemies and complicated trusts. Her tone was one of exasperated, protective annoyance, which I found deeply reassuring. It was the typical Juliet, grounded and critical. It was then that the first subtle cracks in my sense of security began to show, orchestrated, I would later realize, with clinical precision. Lorenzo became intensely, almost suffocatingly supportive. He insisted on handling all communication with the lawyers and the obscure offshore entity. "You're too stressed, Aunt Julia," he'd argue, his voice laced with persuasive, earnest care. "These people are complex. They respond to strength and technical language. Let me protect you from the jargon and the predatory nature of high finance." He was taking the burden, the true stress from my shoulders, and I felt a profound sense of relief. Juliet's actions, too, began to subtly isolate me. She started a new routine of bringing me herbal teas and insisting on long, mandatory afternoon naps. "Rest, dear sister. All this excitement is simply too much for a woman your age. You need to be sharp when we finally liquidate this mess." She would take the phone away from me, hide the most confusing documents, and gently usher me into the garden, framing it as a necessary medical intervention for my frail nerves. The house, which had become a center of frantic financial activity, began to feel like a comfortable, luxurious prison where my only job was to stay calm. One afternoon, a genuinely unnerving incident occurred. An unmarked dark-colored car idled on the street outside for almost 2 hours. The driver, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, seemed to be staring directly at the house. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drum solo of terror. I immediately told Lorenzo, who was upstairs sorting through Adam's old financial ledgers. He rushed downstairs, his expression one of immediate, controlled alarm. He spoke to the car from behind the heavy, lace-curtained window, his voice low and serious. "Aunt Julia, this is exactly what I was afraid of. These people, the ones Adam was dealing with, they are watching. They are waiting for the structure to fail so they can swoop in. This inheritance isn't just money. It's a target painted on your back." Juliet immediately insisted on installing a full security system, paid for, of course, from my primary checking account, the one still very much under my control. "We need to be proactive, Julia. We can't rely on the police. This is Adam's mess, and we have to clean it up ourselves." The overwhelming evidence was pointing toward a dangerous external conspiracy. The mysterious email address, the watching car, the complex offshore trust, the vague threats. It all suggested that Adam, perhaps unknowingly, had entangled me in something far more sinister than a simple inheritance. My family, my rock, was closing ranks around me, shielding me from the encroaching danger. I felt a desperate, almost blind gratitude for their fierce protectiveness. I was scared, yes, but I was not alone. The atmosphere in the house, once characterized by the gentle hum of routine, now throbbed with a nervous, barely contained tension. The appearance of the surveillance car had been the catalyst, transforming my life from a quiet domestic drama into what felt like a low-budget, high-stakes thriller. I found myself checking the windows constantly, jumping at the slightest sound. The wind in the eaves, the groan of the old house settling. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every phone call felt like a prelude to an ambush.
I was beginning to rely completely on Juliet's tease to calm my nerves and on Lorenzo's endless financial updates to feel grounded in reality. The sense of external danger reached a terrifying peak 2 nights later. I was jarred awake around 3 a.m. by a loud, unmistakable thud from the downstairs conservatory. My heart seized in my chest, beating a frantic, erratic rhythm. I immediately called out, a choked whisper in the dark. "Lorenzo? Juliet?" Lorenzo, who had insisted on staying over for security reasons, materialized at my bedroom door almost instantly, silent and watchful. He was fully dressed, a detail I barely registered in my terror. "Stay here, Aunt Julia. Don't move. I'll check the lower floor." The next few minutes were agonizing. I heard muffled movement, the sound of glass crunching underfoot, and a low, frustrated sound from Lorenzo. When he returned, his face was pale, his breathing rapid, but he was calm. "It's fine, Aunt Julia. A window was forced, but the alarm went off right away. They didn't take anything. They were just trying to send a message." The message was received. The fear was now visceral, no longer abstract. Juliet, summoned immediately, was utterly incandescent with protective fury. She paced the room, her voice sharp and uncompromising. "This is madness, Julia. They're escalating. They know you have the power to move the Ethereum funds, and they will stop at nothing to get their hands on it, or worse, to get you to sign it over to them." She kept pointing to the broken window, using it as a dramatic, chilling visual aid. The discussion that followed felt less like a familial consultation and more like a high-level strategy meeting with my life and assets hanging precariously in the balance. Lorenzo, leveraging the incident, presented what he framed as the only viable, bulletproof solution, a move that would, to me, appear to be the ultimate act of self-sacrifice and devotion. "Aunt Julia," he began, his voice lowered with sincerity, leaning in so our eyes met, "the money is the target, but you are the key. If we move the funds into a new, complex structure, a domestic trust that we manage, it becomes untouchable for a time. More importantly, we can then formally transfer the signatory power away from you. This way, if they get to you, they can't touch the money because you won't have the legal authority to move it. It's the ultimate protection. Invisibility." Juliet immediately reinforced the proposal, adding a layer of practical urgency that left no room for doubt. "And the house too, Julia. They know this is your primary address, your sanctuary. We need to legally shield the house from any potential legal action or seizures connected to Adam's shady past. We'll temporarily place it into the same trust with Lorenzo and I holding the joint power of attorney, just until the Ethereum money is fully liquidated and deposited safely back in London. It's the only way to safeguard your future." Their logic, layered over my paralyzing fear, felt irrefutable. They were offering to take the unbearable risk and the complex management onto their own shoulders, simply to ensure my safety. I was terrified, exhausted, and profoundly grateful. In that moment of intense vulnerability, my trust in them was absolute. They were my flesh and blood, my only remaining anchors in a world Adam's secrets had suddenly made hostile. "A power of attorney? A temporary trust?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "You will manage everything? The house, too?" I asked, feeling a strange, wrenching pain at the thought of losing control of my home, but the fear was a heavier weight. "Every penny, every document, every risk," Lorenzo confirmed, his eyes warm and reassuring. We protect what's ours, Aunt Julia. You just have to sign a few more papers to transfer the control, and you will be safe. The documents were prepared with astonishing speed, another detail that should have raised suspicion, but was dismissed under the guise of urgency. The final climactic signing took place the next afternoon. Lorenzo meticulously laid out a stack of documents on the old mahogany dining table. The power of attorney form, the deed of trust for the house, and the final authorization papers for the Ethereum liquidation. As I signed, my hand trembling slightly, Juliet hovered nearby, not with the documents, but with a silver tray bearing a celebratory cup of my favorite chamomile tea. "A toast, dear sister," she murmured, her face etched with relief. "To your safety, to our family. Soon, this nightmare will be over, and you can enjoy your life again, protected and secure." I looked at their faces, Lorenzo's focused, capable intensity, and Juliet's maternal, unwavering support, and a wave of profound relief washed over me. I had transferred all my worldly assets and financial control, but I had secured something far more precious, my safety and the unshakable bond with my family. The sun streamed into the dining room, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the mahogany table where the final, conclusive act had just taken place. I had signed the last document, the deed of trust, securing the house's ownership under the new, protective legal structure managed by Juliet and Lorenzo. A feeling of profound, almost dizzying emptiness settled over me, replacing the relentless fear that had consumed me for weeks. The fight was over. I was finally safe. "There," I said, laying the pen down, the click echoing in the sudden silence. "It's done. We beat them. We're safe." Lorenzo carefully gathered the signed documents, his movements economical and precise. He didn't smile. The first time I had seen his face completely devoid of that easy, charming light. He simply tapped the stack against the table edge to align the papers. "Yes, Aunt Julia, it is done. Absolutely everything has been transferred to the newly formed Moretti Carver Holdings Trust. The Ethereum funds are liquidated, deposited, and placed under the trust's direct control. Your primary accounts, the house, the physical assets, all of it. All legally mine and Juliet's to manage."
Juliet, still holding the tray with the half-drunk chamomile tea, stepped closer. Her expression, too, was utterly transformed. The loving, protective sister was gone, replaced by a woman whose eyes held a hard, glacial resentment I had never witnessed. Her lips curled into a thin, cruel line. "The funny thing about these deeds of trust, Julia," Juliet said, her voice now a low, chilling monotone, the cadence of a judge passing sentence, "is that they don't actually protect you from anything, not from Adam's ghosts, and certainly not from the people who were truly watching." My blood ran instantly cold. A prickle of profound terror started at the base of my neck and spread outward. I felt a sudden sickening drop in my stomach. "What are you talking about, Juliet? The men in the car? The forced window? We were in danger." I was trembling uncontrollably, the solid ground of my trust dissolving beneath my feet. Lorenzo tucked the stack of documents into his sleek leather briefcase, clicking the lock shut. The sound was deafening, final.
He finally looked at me, a cold, predatory light in his eyes. The mask fully dropped. The car was hired, Aunt Julia, paid for from your own checking account. Thanks to a few accidental wire transfers, I slipped into the initial paperwork. The thud you heard? That was me, using a pebble on the conservatory window, then setting off the alarm on a delay. A theatrical flourish. The threat, Aunt Julia, was always meant to be external. The email contact, the people watching for the transfer, that was just a line Adam left in a draft folder, a piece of old business jargon I repurposed to make you nervous. Every detail, from the surveillance to the breaking and entering, was meticulously staged. It made our proposal, the power of attorney, the trust, sound like an act of heroic family protection rather than a meticulously planned hostile takeover. The realization hit me with the physical force of a blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I stumbled backward, clutching the back of the chair. The betrayal wasn't about Adam's secrets. It was about theirs. All the fear, the sleepless nights, the terror, it was all manufactured by the two people I trusted most. Why? I managed to choke out, the word raw and broken, barely a whisper. Why, Juliet? Why this cruelty? Juliet's face contorted, her composure finally breaking into a mask of bitter envy and rage. Why? You sit here in your charming ancient house, smelling of lavender and old wood, living your quiet little life, cherished by a man who saw the world. Adam. She spat the name, her voice laced with venom. He loved you, the meek, beautiful sister. He left you everything. And what did I get? The firm sister, the capable sister, the one who cleans up the messes? I've been your emotional anchor, your silent housekeeper, your confidant, all while you got the adventure, the comfort, and now the fortune.
Her voice rose to a furious crescendo. I deserved this, Julia. Lorenzo deserved this. We were the ones doing the actual work of living while you were just smelling the flowers. When that first letter came, revealing the Ethereum money, Lorenzo and I didn't see a gift. We saw the correction of a lifelong injustice. Lorenzo stepped forward, placing a gentle, mocking hand on my shoulder. It was necessary, Aunt Julia. You were too sentimental, too trusting. You would have wasted it on charity or on making the garden look neater. This way, we honor the money. We will actually use it, not just appreciate its quiet details. And don't worry about the house, he added with a chilling smile, his fingers digging into my shoulder. You can stay, of course, for now. It is, after all, a family trust. But your time of quiet, passive happiness is definitively over. My world, the small, certain world of old wood, whispering wind, and unwavering family love, shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The warmth of the coffee, the comfort of the routine, the relief of safety, it had all been a lie. A performance orchestrated to lead me to this final, fatal moment. The true danger was never an external criminal or a phantom from Adam's past.
The threat had been sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my tea and helping me file my papers, patiently waiting for the single devastating moment when they could strip me of everything I had. I stared at Juliet, the sister of my blood, and at Lorenzo, the nephew I had loved like a son. Their faces, once beacons of light, were now cold, calculating mirrors reflecting the terrible, blinding clarity of a betrayal that cut deeper than any loss. The drama was not in the search for a secret. The drama was the slow, meticulous dismantling of my trust, culminating in a single, unchallengeable signature. I had not been protected. I had been perfectly, clinically, and irrevocably robbed. The sun streamed into the dining room, but the light felt cold, sterile. Juliet's venomous confession hung heavy in the air, a toxic cloud of lifelong resentment. Lorenzo stood beside her, his face a mask of avarice and ruthless efficiency. The signed documents, my entire life, locked securely in his briefcase. I stared at them, my heart no longer racing, but strangely still, utterly frozen by the magnitude of their evil. You staged the break-in, I whispered, not as a question, but as a statement of devastating finality. My voice was hollow, barely audible. It was a theatrical flourish, Aunt Julia, Lorenzo repeated, a patronizing smirk playing on his lips. He ran a proprietary hand over the mahogany table. We needed you terrified, desperate for protection. You were too sentimental to part with your wealth willingly. Fear, however, is a wonderful motivator. Juliet stepped forward, her victorious smile wide and cruel. It's over, Julia. The meek shall inherit nothing. The house is ours. The money is ours. You can keep your little garden and your memories. Consider it a pension. She actually reached out to pat my cheek, a gesture I flinched away from with instinctive revulsion. I looked at the silver tray resting beside the signed papers, the chamomile tea still faintly fragrant, the tea she insisted I drink before every critical meeting, the tea she said was for my nerves. It was the most perfect, beautiful prop in their sordid drama. And then, slowly, a change began to take place within me. The shock receded, replaced by a cold, sharp lucidity. I felt a slight involuntary tremor of a smile touch my lips, a gesture that completely unnerved them. "You're right, Lorenzo," I said, my voice gaining strength, losing the tremor. "Fear is a wonderful motivator. It makes you overlook details. It makes you become arrogant. And in your arrogance, you both forgot the cardinal rule of high finance. Always read the fine print twice, especially when you're writing it yourself." Juliet's smile vanished. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed, his head tilting in suspicion. "What are you babbling about, Julia? It's all sealed. It's all legal. We watched you sign every single page." I pushed myself off the chair, my 70 years suddenly feeling like a coat of iron mail. I walked calmly to the window, the same one Lorenzo had used to spy on me and the one he later used to stage the break-in. "You were so focused on the Ethereum Global Trust money. which you saw as the prize. But you missed the actual game, I stated, turning back to face them, my gaze steady. When I found Adam's letter and those old unused art tickets, I felt a wave of peace. But a tiny logical voice in my head, the one that had listened to Adam talk about his complex structures for 40 years, told me that a man who deals in offshore secrets doesn't leave his major assets in a simple one-layer trust that could be hijacked by a single signature. He always has a final layer. Lorenzo's hand instinctively reached for his briefcase, his composure finally starting to crack. "You're stalling." "I'm explaining," I corrected him. "That encrypted email you found, the one with the cryptic line, 'They will be watching for the transfer,' you assumed it meant external enemies. I realized it was a time-delayed safety protocol Adam had built into the original Ethereum documents years ago. He told me once that if his executor, me, tried to liquidate the full fund too fast without activating a specific security code, the money would automatically be diverted. I paused, letting the silence twist the knife. "You pushed me to sign the liquidation papers too quickly. You didn't give me time to activate Adam's internal security code. And by failing to do so, you triggered the final contingency." Juliet shook her head, her voice thin with desperation. "That's a lie. I checked the documents. There's no such code." "There is, darling sister," I said, my voice now pitying. "But it was only ever mentioned in the very last note Adam gave me, the one I found tucked into the unused exhibition tickets in the attic. He wrote, 'If you ever need a clean start, contact the curator of the Da Vinci Wing. Tell him the show is postponed. He holds the final clean ledger. And a phone number.'"
My expression hardened. While you were installing your expensive, useless security system, and while you were forcing me to drink your sedative tea, I placed a quiet call, not to a lawyer, but to the curator, who, it turns out, is the administrator of Adam's true, final, immutable trust. The Ethereum money, the entire massive sum, was rejected and transferred out of the Ethereum structure and into Adam's immutable, unsearchable trust, exactly 4 hours before I signed your final liquidation papers yesterday. Lorenzo's face went white. He scrambled to his briefcase, pulling out a document reader. He rapidly typed in login credentials, then stopped dead, staring at the screen. The account, the main ledger is empty. It's been zeroed out. "The funds are secure, Lorenzo," I confirmed, a deep, satisfying peace washing over me. "Your Moretti Carver Holdings Trust is an empty shell. You spent a month conning a confused old lady for the grand prize of nothing." Juliet let out a strangled scream of pure incandescent fury, lunging toward me. Before she could take 2 steps, the sound I had been waiting for finally erupted outside, the distinct, loud, rapidly approaching wail of police sirens. I turned back to the window, watching the flashing blue and red lights cut through the afternoon sun. "You see, Lorenzo, Juliet," I said, my voice steady, victorious. "When you staged that break-in, you used your own car to drive away, thinking you were being clever by parking it around the corner. But the elaborate, high-definition security system I had installed, the one you thought you controlled, was set up to feed a parallel, unmonitored line to Adam's personal security consultant. He was waiting for my go signal, my signature on the power of attorney, which was also my signal that the financial fraud was complete. The front door crashed open, and the sound of heavy boots
filled the hall. You're being arrested for conspiracy to commit felony fraud, staging a break-in, and attempted theft of major assets, I stated calmly, watching the police officers stream into the dining room. You played a brilliant game of fear, but you underestimated the enduring lesson Adam taught me. The real power isn't in what you have, but in what people think you have. As the officers handcuffed a screaming, resisting Juliet and a silently raging Lorenzo, I picked up the silver tray and the abandoned teacup. The air in the room was finally clean. I was an old woman again, but no longer a vulnerable one. I had lost my husband, but I had rediscovered my steel. The house, the money, and the quiet dignity of my life were mine once more. The quiet life I treasured was not a weakness, but the perfect camouflage.